Hello and welcome everybody to our Friday webinar. We are on today. We have a very special webinar. We actually had you here, I think it was almost exactly a year ago today. So we've got Dr. Joerg Mayer, and we are doing the University Vet Insider Experiences of an Exotics Pet Vet. So welcome. Thank you for joining us on this Friday.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
So we're going to be talking about some, so obviously birds and some other exotics. I just wanted to say I finally had the chance. Something I've always wanted to see was a platypus last week at the San Diego Safari Park. I did not even know they had one outside of is it Australia or New Zealand? But those guys are really small and fast swimmers. That is like as about exotic of a creature I've ever set eyes on.
Yeah,
I
and
was
also physiologically they're pretty amazing too. So yeah,
yeah.
they're definitely one of those animals that's kind of like once you start reading and studying them, where you go down a rabbit hole and it gets a little bit weirder and weirder and weirder, and so but they're extremely
They
unique
get
and
stranger each. Yeah, yeah. What would be like the equivalent of an exotic like that for you that you've treated or have had the chance to to work with? Is there something that stands out in your mind?
yeah, I mean, I've got so many things, right? And it kind of like depends how you define weirdness. But I mean, definitely one of the, let's say, more challenging patients that we had to treat was probably some cockroaches as patients.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly the reaction that most people have. It's like, what, you don't just use a phone book to treat them or something?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. No, there's like, and actually some of them, like the Madagascar hissing cockroaches, they're actually also fairly popular with people who are into invertebrates, and they're about yay big, and they can be quite interesting from their behavior. They make noises, hence the name hissing cockroach.
Yeah.
And but also, like, if you end up working for a zoo, sometimes they have them as an exhibit animal. But also they might have a breeding colony that they actually feed out to birds, for example, that are insectivorous, and throw them in the exhibit, and let the birds or other animals forage for them and stuff. So, but
Very nice.
they can get problems too that potentially need to be treated. So that's definitely one of those challenges. How do you treat a cockroach without killing it, and make sure you at the end of the treatment
Yeah,
is
you're
actually
usually doing the
better off.
opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So that's a little sneak peek about the non-feathered exotics that you might see in a day's work. So as we dive deeper into the university insider here, just a reminder for folks that are joining us that if you have a question, to use the Q&A button and not the chat feature. We'll see if we can get to some of those later on. But Dr. Mayer, I wanted to ask you, your um, uh, you've got the DABVP, DECZM. Do you want to walk us through what those kind of, just a real quick reminder of that? Because you also have the European accreditation. I want to know the difference might be in,
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah, I can quickly talk about this. So basically, obviously, the first couple letters are obviously the DVM kind of degree, which, here in the States, you kind of like get automatically after you graduate from veterinary school. So whereas I graduated from school in Europe, and so usually you're not considered like a doctor. You still have to do kind of some kind of theses on it. And so I did mine actually on the rat brain, and that was quite interesting. I had to transplant a gland that lives in the brain in rats, and see if that once we transplanted that, if that would actually take up function. And so that was kind of interesting. Anyhow, and then you graduate with your DVM degree, And then I did an internship in zoological medicine and surgery, which brought me over to the States, to Rhode Island to be specific. And then I thought, I probably need something else, like to specialize. And to be honest, at that time, I really didn't know 100% what I want to do for the next 35 years of my life. So I enrolled into a Master of Science program, which was put on by the Royal Veterinary College in London, England, and it's called a Master of Science degree in Wild Animal Health, and which was an amazing program because we had a lot of people from all over the world were flown in to lecture, and you would have different duties, and you would get a real good idea of the the plethora of activities that could be associated when you deal with wild or non-domesticated animals. So that was great. And I did my practical study for this at the wildlife clinic at Tufts University. So where I looked at the common loon from New England. Which is a beautiful bird, obviously. And so I try to correlate the heavy metal load that they had, because they pick it up from the environment, and try to correlate this to a disease, to aspergillosis, through post-mortem findings. After that was done, they kind of, I guess, liked me at the university, so they offered me a job. So I did stay at Tufts for 10 years, working with exotic animals only, and then I got my first board certification. So everything until then you basically do as a general practitioners, but you can't consider yourself, or you can't advertise anything that you're a specialist in anything. You can say you have a special interest. So it's kind of like a legal terminology that doesn't really mean that you can't function at the level of a specialist. There's many people that are extremely uh, productive and actually great veterinarians in a certain set. So let's say, in avian medicine, and yet they never had the time. They had, something else going on in life. Maybe they were wanting to raise a family, and or whatever it is, and so they never sat for a board exam. But if you do sit for the board exam, if you sit for this, and there's a qualification period, so you can qualify in a couple of different ways. But for that, the first one, and that you mentioned, is the ABVP, is the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners. And that specialty exam is really geared to exactly what the name stands for. It's usually for veterinarians that work in private practice, usually that have a hefty caseload, clinical caseload, but maybe they don't have the resources and or the time to engage in hardcore research projects, where you need to line up X amount of animals and something like this, because their day is basically driven by clients who bring in their patients. And so one of the qualifications is that you, I think, work with the species for, I think it's something like 6 years, 5 or 6 years. You have to kind of like document that, and then you have to write a couple of different cases. So basically you have to really document 2 cases that you saw, and it basically walks you through of what the clinical signs were, what your findings were on the exam, and then how you derived at the diagnosis. And then how did you treat this? And the treatment could be like a cancer treatment. It could be a surgery that you removed something. It is something like this, and then hopefully you document the outcome. And so you have this very comprehensive kind of overview. And what that is meant to do, it's basically meant to show to the people evaluating these case reports that you have a firm understanding of the current literature and the current practices, that that you basically educated yourself to a level that is like, oh look, this is the appropriate diagnostic methods. A lot of has changed in the recent years, right? So more and more private practitioners, for example, are now purchasing CT scans, purchasing CT machines where they can do CT scans, which, 15, 20 years ago, that was more or less exclusively found at universities or large referral centers. But now costs have come down. Those machines have also like gotten smaller, just with anything, just like with smartphones and any kind of technology. So they fit in the back room of an existing practice. And so new drugs are out on the market. And so basically that's what those case reports are supposed to be there to basically show to the committee, to the exam committee, that yep, I know about these, I use those, and here's my thinking and here's my doing, how I hopefully cured or fixed the animal. So then once you went through that process, which can be quite cruelsome and intimidating in itself, because you're going to get this back and maybe they say, well, we don't like it, that you have to completely redo it, or you have to potentially add this and this. So it's a little bit of back and forth. Very, very, very rarely is it like a slam dunk where you submit something and they say, oh, lovely, where have you been all my life? Thank you. So it's kind of an exercise in it's a reality check. So, and then once you have those two cases approved, then you're allowed to sit for those for these specialty exam, which is a gruesome exam, multiple hundred multiple choice questions, and a slide exam. So it basically is, again, another way to show that, yep, I've read the books, I kind of memorized quite a few things, and I can recognize lesions. They show me something on the slide, I can recognize anatomical features, and then you do this, and then a couple of weeks later you get hopefully an envelope or an email these days, if you passed or not. And then once you pass that, then now legally you are considered potentially as a specialist status. And so a few years ago, there was, if you wanted to be a specialist in exotics, you only had a couple of options, and one of them was an avian specialist. So the AAV, the American Association of Avian Veterinarians, that was one of the first ones to have that organized. But if you were really excited about rabbits or ferrets or something, it was difficult to show your specialist status. So, but then eventually the ABVP was petitioned by a whole bunch of people that were working with small mammals. For example, some people that were working in lab animal medicine and were really good with rats, mice, guinea pigs, chinchillas, all the stuff that's being used. And so a whole bunch of veterinarians got together and say, hey, how about you offer, or we create this specialty for small mammals, because we have a lot of literature available. There is a huge body of knowledge, and during the process that all needs to be documented, so you need to make a strong case for it. And after review period, they agree or not, or say, hey, yeah, this is okay, but how do you structure your training peer? So it's a very well vetted kind of situation. And so then I was fortunate enough to actually sit that exam with the first year, and somehow I passed. So I got my ABVP exotic companion mammals. So that was my first.
So you were like a super student, it sounds like.
Well, it takes a long time, but I mean, if you work at a university, that's kind of expected of you too, to reach that. And once we had that, my boss could actually say, well, we expect that from you now. You want to be a small mammal specialist, so here's your here's your specialty, please sit for it. And so, but anyway, I didn't need that motivation. I really wanted to do it for myself. And then there is the second one is the diplomat of the European College of Zoological Medicine, which is similar but different. So it's a European College of Zoological Medicine, so that a college is a little bit different than the practitioner boards, as the American college usually embraces more the academician side from a point of view. It's the standards are potentially different. I don't want to say they are more rigorous or less, but in order to qualify, you usually have to go through an approved training process. And during your training, the progress of the resident, which it's called when you're going through, so usually it's a 3-year program, a residency, which is you're constantly being checked on. So you have to put your packages into a committee and say, look, this half year we saw X amount of these species, X amount of this, we did that many biopsies, we did that many dental procedures. So it's a very strictly regulated and policed. And so there's also enough pressure on the mentors to make sure that the mentees are getting exposed. You got to go to these conferences, you got to give presentations, you got to do a scientific paper. And so after the 3 years, you have to make sure that these papers are being accepted. So they have to be published somewhere in a peer-reviewed journal, which is, again, it's a daunting process. And then again, there is one of these big exams at the end. And then that usually takes place on the yearly conference, and it's a 1 or 2 day exam. Again, usually with a lot of practical choice, maybe small essays, practical exam where they give you a case scenario with a couple slides, and then you basically have to say, okay, in that case, I would potentially perform that diagnostics, or this is potentially that disease, and here's what the next step, and here's the treatment I would suggest, and then that's being graded, and the same thing, a couple of weeks later you'll find out if you passed or not. And since that was not enough punishment, I decided to go for a third one for the American board. So it's the same thing, but also a little bit different. And so this is why I have the European board and the American board.
So all in all, how long did that take you to get from the starting point to where you are today? How many years was that?
Well, your starting point. What is the starting point? Is that kindergarten, or is that I always wanted to be a veterinarian, or is that further down the road? You're muted. Somehow you're muted again.
Sorry. I'm going to guess like first step into like the college classroom or the veterinary college classroom.
So I think, I mean, I guess, like if I'm looking back, once I started my academic career to the point where I took my last exam, I think it was 14 years. Gosh, I'm getting more gray hair just thinking about this.
So moving on to the patient side, I was curious to know who walks in your door, like at the university hospital. What type of? How do you get your patients? Who's coming in? Are they pet owners?
Slithers, flies, swims.
Yes.
So basically,
are they referrals from other vets, or are they pet owners?
Yes, both. So basically, usually, when I say usually, I'm talking about other services that obviously deal with dogs and cats only. So if you want to see the surgeon or internal medicine or the ophthalmologist, you can only get an appointment at university if you have a referral appointment. So you first need to go to your normal, regular veterinarian, and they potentially need to already diagnose something and say, look, I'm really worried this is this and this, it needs a complicated surgery, or it needs a complicated eye exam, and I don't have that equipment, or knows what, I want you to be seen by a specialist, by an ophthalmologist, by a board certified surgeon, so here's my referral letter. And then and then they're allowed to come to the university. So there's only a handful of services, actually, I think 2 or 3, that don't need that, and we are one of those. So if you have an exotic pet, you can directly come to us, to the university, without being seen by a traditional, veterinarian. And that might have something to do that they're so different, and that a lot of veterinarians potentially don't feel super comfortable, doing even what I would consider basic stuff, like taking blood, taking an X-ray, everything that they would feel absolutely is no problem for a dog and cat. But the moment it's a macaw, or it's a gerbil, or a fish, a lot of people, it's like, it's like I'm not comfortable, because traditionally they haven't had that amount of training with it, so they can come directly to us. And so, but I would say that, the percentage of referrals that we see probably increases from year to year, because I think the younger generation, the new graduates, they feel more and more comfortable, with seeing birds, reptiles, rabbits, ferrets, and all that stuff. And so a lot of them already did that first, exam, maybe took a radiograph, and then they say, oh, this looks really bad, maybe you should go to a specialist now. So I would say we have 70-80% referrals, and 20-30% primary, first opinion.
And then do you usually take over the case entirely, or do you coordinate with the original vet that the patient was brought to?
Yeah, it depends, but the vast majority of the cases, like I said, they're coming over. They're being a lot of times referred to because, a more complicated, a longer procedure needs to be done. But every time when we do something, the referring veterinarian gets a copy of the paperwork, what we did, and obviously they can call and ask questions, and all the test results, so we are 100% transparent, because we kind of like work as a team. We want to work as a team. So, and sometimes I actually say to the client, it's like, listen, for that recheck, you don't need to come back to us. I'm happy to do this with your regular veterinarian, and if they have a question, they can call me, and they can even follow up with an X-ray and send me the X-ray. So nowadays it's so easy, to work with another veterinarian as a team on something. So it clearly depends on the severity of the issue.
And would you say that, as a pet owner, that if you have an issue that your vet isn't able to resolve, is it something that they should advocate to their vet to get a referral, or is it something that the referral comes, usually it's pushed through the like if they're saying, can I go to the university hospital for this? They need a referral from the vet. Is that something that bird people should and can do?
Well,
Push for that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and and sometimes, I mean, I have that discussion with my clients too, where they come to me, or to our service, for a specific issue, and we provide them, here's what we should do, and sometimes they don't like that. They don't like it. It's like, well, I was thinking we can just get away with this and this, and I'm like, here's the problem. If we don't do X, Y, and Z, and I like to use the car analogy a lot, because I feel like, a lot of stuff, when we start talking doctor speak, and I think we have a potential to lose somebody very quickly with using big words and fancy words, and that's not productive. And so I also say, listen, it's like you basically you want to look at the situation like you brought your car to the mechanic and say, hey, it's like, I don't know what's going on, but if I drive faster than 55, something starts to rattle, like, or the steering wheel starts to shake. Can you check it out what it is? And so the mechanic is like, well, absolutely. But what does the mechanic say? Leave your car here, right? Like, have somebody pick you up or drop it off tonight, and leave the car with here. We're gonna open the hood, right? We're gonna put it on the jack and look underneath, right? Nowadays, they have onboard computers. They can put their little reader unit on, and maybe there's an electron. And so that's what I say. It's like, it's like, yeah, our maybe idea of taking blood from the patient is literally opening the hood, like looking at the machine, right? Then they want to look underneath, right? Why the steering wheel is, are the tires all balanced? That's our equivalent of maybe taking a radiograph. And so sometimes we get this question, well, you want to take blood and a radiograph, can't we just do one? Because, I understand it's money, and sometimes that's a limiting. And I said, sure, we can do one, but, as long as you understand that you're kind of like limiting a little bit, like you're telling the car mechanic not to put your car up on a hoist because I'm worried it's going to fall down, and can you just open the hood? And I'm like, yeah, sure, I can work with it, but as long as you understand that limits a little bit my diagnostic ability. So, and like once we explain why we want to do a thing, I feel like we get a much better teamwork going, and the owner kind of like understands, oh, that's why you want to do 2 or 3 tests, and so it's, yeah, but it's I think it all comes down to good communication, like, and setting expectations, and what, can I do something if we only spend $80? I think we can still do something, but don't expect me to find out why that steering wheel is shaking.
You also probably get people who drive or fly from, I mean, they come from other good distances because you're a university hospital. So do you typically, normally if you're local vet, you would drive over and you'd leave the same day with your bird. With you guys, is it something where you have like a boarding facility? Like how long do you, what's the longest you've kept a patient to kind of
Oh my God,
diagnose? And do the owners, like they must have to go home and come back, or they stay in hotels, or how does that? You got some travel arrangements to deal with there.
Yeah, absolutely, all of the above, right? Some of them, they say, you know what, I can see how that's going to take a few days, and I'm just gonna drive home tonight, and then we're just gonna be talking on the phone. And others have a different approach. They're like, you know what, I'm gonna actually book a hotel here in town, and because I want to visit every day, or if we have to do something complicated, I would rather sit in the room and talk to you face to face than over the phone. And yeah, I mean, it happens very frequently, since we are kind of like a tertiary care center and a referral, and so and we are always aware of it. I always want to make a point that it's like, all right, we want to get to the point very fast. We want to get hopefully to a diagnosis very fast. But that might take a whole next day, because we got to a lot of times anesthetize the animal for an invasive procedure to get a diagnosis. And then, if we take a sample that has to be sent to the pathologist, if we take a biopsy or something like this in order to get a diagnosis, or we have to take blood and send it out to a specialty lab because we're doing kind of like a more advanced test that sometimes even takes 2 to 3 days. So what sometimes happens is like, look, we can do the diagnostic procedure tomorrow, and then, your animal can potentially go home if it's stable enough. And then we'll just have to wait until the results trickle in. Sometimes it takes a week to get results. Sometimes it takes, 24, 48 hours. And then we regroup, and then we say, oh my God, it's actually worse than it is, or it's actually better than it is. So obviously we're doing these procedures because we don't know what exactly we're dealing with. So, and then it could be that then we're coming up with a plan of what to do next after we have a diagnosis, and say, listen, can you drop the patient off, next Monday for this and this, for the surgery or for the procedure? And I would guess that this animal needs to stay after the procedure, or whatever we're doing, therapy for 2 or 3 days, or if it is chemotherapy, they sometimes need to be in the hospital for weeks. And so it all depends. And so again, I think it comes down to good communication. We'll talk. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable leaving their pet in. Is there a different option? And sometimes there is no other option, because there's only one way to deal with it. Or the other way, there is an option. Say, yeah, we could do something on an outpatient basis, but most of the time these options are not radical enough if you treat like something really bad, something really aggressive, something advanced. So and like as I said, as long as everybody is on the same page, what are the advantages of set treatment or protocol, and what are the disadvantages, and then we come to a conclusion together. What, because I mean, it doesn't help me. It doesn't make me a good doctor if the owner is frustrated, and if they, it's like if they feel uncomfortable with what I want to do. So it has to be a team approach for sure.
And what about the student involvement? The university students, are these undergrads that did their sciences, or are these people who have
So
going on to masters and graduate degrees?
So yeah, no, they did the undergraduate degree already. They're 4 years of training. That could be animal science, that could be, conservation. There's so many degrees now, and then they're doing their veterinary degree, and we see them in their final year. So they in the clinics, they'll start clinics in their fourth and final year. And at that point, they had like obviously all the theoretical stuff in lectures, and now it's hands-on time. And so, obviously, with us dealing with exotics, and that's sometimes where we get complaints from the student side, but we explain it to them in the beginning because our patients are sometimes so small, so fragile, that the students' hands-on experience is a little bit more limited than if a Great Dane walks in, or a Labrador, where you have all those big veins and all, and so whereas this, if I always say, sometimes we get a finch in or parakeet and we only have one shot to get blood at it, and so this is why they don't even let me touch it. It's our technicians that are black belts and getting blood from these little animals. They'll do it, right? Because they do it all day long. And so I just tell my students, it's like, please don't be frustrated about it, because we don't have 2 or 4 options, for trials to get to the blood. It's like one stick and that's it, and that's what our technicians do. And again, once you explain it to them, they're fine with it. And so, that, yeah, but
That would
it's
be
it's
an
definitely a
intimidating.
little.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and that's why it's a little bit more limiting, I think, from a student perspective. But sometimes we have great students. I mean, sometimes we have students that used to work as a technician in clinics. That's all a lot of, and we can tell immediately the way how to handle the patients. And so then it is up to us to decide. What, that person can be on a little bit longer leash. We can actually let them try because we all feel confident. But it's rare. So the students are usually in a kind of observing role, and then we spend a lot of times talking about it, right? We say, look, this is what we do. This is the appropriate test. This is how you take the radiograph, and then, so they learn a lot by osmosis. We spend a lot of times talking about these cases with our students.
Are these students usually they've already decided they want to go an exotics path, or are they deciding between dog, cat, or exotics, or when you by the time
Yes.
they come to you?
Yes, again, the right answer is all of the above. It's just about percentages. So we have, I mean, and even when I lecture to the whole class in the first or in the third year, and I may have in a certain course, 40, 50 people sitting in front of me, and I tell them, listen, I understand that the vast majority will mainly see dogs and cats. And there will, out of 50 students, there will maybe only be 3 of them that are really at the end working full time with exotics. But what's so nice about it, is that the vast majority, they realize, it's like, well, I want to work in a clinic, that does 80-90% dogs and cats, but I want to feel confident enough. I want to feel, that I can at least help a client that comes in with a cockatoo that is, that has diarrhea or has respiratory distress. I want to be able to potentially take blood or take a radiograph, and so I think that's the vast majority of students, that say, what, I'm not gonna earn my keep with just exotics, but I want to be smart enough and I want to be competent enough, not to freak out and do at least that initial step to be able to decide, is that something that we can treat right here, or is it something that needs to be referred to a secondary or tertiary care center? So that, I think that's the vast majority of students that we're dealing with.
Just before we do have a couple questions popping in, but before we get to those, I know that you have some interesting projects that you work on that might not be aware of, and one of them, bees.
Yeah.
You mentioned it briefly earlier before we started this, but if you could just, because I'm trying to what all the buzz is about.
Yeah, I got stung, so to say, and with that, and I love it. I've been on and off being a beekeeper for, 15 years more or less, and so a couple years ago, actually, January 1st, 2017. A new legal requirement kicked in. The Food and Drug Administration, which is the governing body here in the United States, which regulates access to drugs, and they basically make the decision what you can buy at over the counter and what you need to go to a doctor for a prescription. They basically clamped down significantly on the access to antibiotics, which you used to be able to go to a farmer's supply store, like a Tractor Supply or whatever you call it, and get like a bag of antibiotics to put in the drinking water for your backyard poultry, for your, whatever you had at home, and including bees, because sometimes they get a disease that has to be treated with antibiotic. And so they could just waltz in there, buy, a pound or half a pound of tetramycin, and then just sprinkle this into the beehive like powder on a donut. And so the FDA now says, bees are actually a food producing animal, and we should be potentially watching them to the same degree than milk cows, or a porcine or pig fattening operation. So everybody probably knows that if a cow is on antibiotics for some reason, the milk has to be condemned. So basically, when the farmer is going to milk the cow, that milk that is collected from that animal has to be literally thrown on the ground, because it has sometimes these residues, these micro amounts of antibiotics. And if you feed, obviously, your bowl of Cheerios in the mornings to your kid, you don't want it to be full of antibiotics. So there is what's called a withdrawal time. So if that farmer injects the cow for a whole week of antibiotic, and the withdrawal time is 21 days, 3 weeks. So then after that last injection, the milk has to be kind of like destroyed or wasted for 21 days, because that's how long it takes before the antibiotics out of the milk. And so since honeybees don't produce milk, but they produce honey, which is basically, enters the food chain at the same level. We put it in everything. I'm having honey right now in my tea, and we all love honey, and so you don't want to have antibiotics in there. So therefore, now all the beekeepers that want access to antibiotics need to contact their veterinarian, and so the veterinarian needs to feel comfortable and needs to be able to prescribe these antibiotics. So now you have a Venn diagram of the beekeeper and a veterinarian here, and in the past there wasn't a lot of overlap. Either you were a beekeeper or you're a veterinarian. There were some veterinarians that were also beekeepers, but what has to happen now is like that Venn diagram comes closer. So basically, that we have a lot of veterinarians that have expertise, that feel comfortable talking to a beekeeper. And so this is why I got really excited about that opportunity, and the school has now, I think, 12 beehives that I'm mainly responsible for. And so I teach our students how to take care of this beautiful world of the pollinators. And the more I'm teaching, the more I'm realizing that, wow, this is actually a phenomenal way to take first and second and third year students that traditionally don't have a lot of access to a living organism, right? Because they spend a lot of times reading the books in anatomy. They're looking at skeletons and maybe formalin fixed cadavers to identify muscles. But working with a real living organism is usually reserved for year 4, or sometimes in the third year they get some access. But so my thing is that I can take first year students, bring them to the beehive, and make them responsible and says keep this alive during the year. So because you got to do treatments, you got to examine them on a more or less weekly basis, you got to feed them, you got to check them for parasites. So it is literally like taking care of an animal. And I can teach a lot of different modalities in it. I can teach the idea of infectious disease. I can teach the idea of parasitology. I can teach the idea of pharmacology with treatments. So I can actually use the beehive to more or less teach how a veterinarian has to think and start to think about, like, what are the consequences of my action, and what do I do when I diagnose this, and how do I diagnose this. So it's been very exciting for me personally, and I get really, really nice feedback from the students. So I see that they're really into it, and so for a teacher, that's obviously the best thing, if you don't have to force your students to be in the classroom, if they want to come and show up on a weekend on their own time. So that's really
Wow. And
rewarding.
honey has such a an overreach on so many things that we consume, humans, birds, in our birds' diets too. So it's an important chain on the whole system of bringing healthy foods to everybody, right?
Yeah,
Bees
it's
are
good
kind of
stuff.
underestimated.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely, absolutely. They're so important, and we're starting to slowly but surely discover all the health benefits that these byproducts have, and so it's very exciting. And every week there's new scientific publications coming out about the benefit of these byproducts from the beehive. So it's really exciting.
so can parrots, birds, can they have honey, like straight honey? Like, can you drizzle it on their food? What health
Yeah,
benefits would that
yeah, so there's
offer them?
actually, yep, there's actually quite a few studies available. Again, mainly from the poultry industry, but they have shown like significant effect, beneficial effect, for example, on the immune system. And so, but also something like pollen. You can go into the store and you can buy, pollen that we know has real beneficial effects for our immune system. It seems to be really beneficial for bone marrow function. So and so yes, there's a lot of scientific data out there that a similar effect can be observed for birds. As with anything, right? As with anything, it's about the dose. So I don't want people to go out now and say, "Oh, Dr. Meyer said, my macaw needs honey. Here is like half a pound of honey for you, boo boo," and we would run into a problem, right? Just like with us. I mean, eating a couple teaspoons of honey, right, a day is absolutely beneficial. If I'm gonna eat 2 jars of honey, my scale is gonna tell me that, whoa, I'm not the same man I used to be a year from now. So it's all about the dose. So, but yeah, sometimes you hear and you read online or whatever these generalizations, and they're like, you shouldn't feed honey to your bird, or you shouldn't feed, because it gets your bird to be obese. And I'm like, well, I kind of agree. If you feed half a pound of honey to your bird, not a good idea. But if you literally, feed a quarter of a tablespoon or something like this, which is for a bird a nice amount, maybe it doesn't seem to be a lot for you, but there's definitely nothing wrong with that. In opposite, it's actually evidence has shown that this is
Maybe
probably really beneficial.
maybe like a little piece of a honeycomb with that, the
Yeah,
foraging.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And then I can chew on it. It's also a little bit of enrichment. Yeah, so absolutely. That's it's just like my grandma said. It's, in moderation. Nothing is bad in moderation. I always say, listen to your parents or grandparents. They were onto something. Maybe they didn't have the science to back it up, but they knew stuff. And now slowly but surely we're
They're on
coming around and say, hey, grandma was actually totally right. And so I love that.
it. Yeah, the old wisdom there.
right?
Hey, so we do have some questions that trickled in for us, and
Cool.
hopefully we can answer some of these for. So someone wants to know, did you find that there is a correlation between heavy metals and aspergillosis? Sorry, and that could that
Aspergillosis.
be true in parrots? Yes, and can that be true in parrots?
Yeah, so that was the idea, and we know primarily, right, that heavy metals, especially like lead, it clearly has an immune suppressive function, so it blocks a couple enzymes and other things. So and that was my hypothesis in the beginning when I did that study. It's like, you know what, in those animals that have high lead levels, that we see maybe higher scores of aspergillosis from a necropsy. Unfortunately, it didn't pan out like this. I didn't see any correlation, and I started to think about it, and it's like, interesting. And so one of the reasons I think that the vast majority, especially for the loons, if they die potentially of lead toxicity, or if they high lead levels, it usually comes from ingesting lead sinkers that were left behind by fishermen, right? And so basically, maybe there was a little fishing line with the hook, and there was lead on there as a weight. And then actually, instead of a big fish, the loon came, ate the fish, right, with the lead and everything, and took off. And so I think what happened is, in the scenario that I was studying, is that it was more like an acute change, right? That we saw like this high spike in lead, which potentially led to their demise very quickly. And aspergillosis is a disease that takes weeks, if not months or years, to develop. So it's a very slow rise. So I think the idea with lead as potentially a background communication association with aspergillosis is in the case if you have a slow chronic toxicity, not an acute one. And I think this probably still holds true, because like I said, you can potentially just think about logically that if you know that lead impedes with immune function, and we need the immune function to keep aspergillosis at bay. So if your immune system is not doing well, then sometimes the aspergillosis takes off.
Then, so question is, do you think that good exotic techs are as rare as finding exotic vets? So you've got your exotic veterinarians, and then you also need to have the vet techs that help out exotics. Who goes in the exotic vet techs? Who goes into that direction typically?
Yeah, I think it's the same. Maybe the problem is even worse for the vet techs, because usually when you work in private practice, you have one doctor and they work at least with two, if not three, techs together, right? So the ratio of doctors to techs is maybe 1 to 3, something like this. So if you have a really good veterinary clinic that are good in a meaning that they feel really confident with exotics, and you have 2 veterinarians that feel really good about exotic animals, in order for them to have a good support system, you need 6 technicians now that feel really good about exotics, right? To keep that ratio up. So I feel like, yes, that's the same struggle, if not worse, right? So in general, I think there is maybe a shortage of technicians, and to be honest, you know it's it's a tough job, long hours, right? Sometimes working on the weekends too, and
I imagine, especially with challenge.
and also I think
If you
emotionally
get them.
it's also very draining too, because it's not a secret. I mean, everybody knows that probably the mortality rate of our exotic patients is significantly higher than dogs and cats. So if you do the same surgery, routine surgery in a dog or a cat, your chances of complications are sometimes 10 times lower than when you do exactly the same surgery in an exotic. So now you add on a pathology, you add on a problem. So now your chances of a complications are already getting a little bit higher, and so it kind of like uh, quadruples sometimes the risks with exotics. And so if you you do see potentially a lot of cases that have an unexpected outcome or a negative outcome. And so I think that also weighs a lot on us, because we do it, we love it, and every time when there is an unexpected outcome, we really take it to heart. And so I think that's an additional stress on us all veterinarians, but also to technicians who take it very personal.
Yeah, you were mentioning earlier about the blood draw on a finch or a parakeet. That alone is very tricky. There's very a lot less room for error, I think, compared
That's
to
right.
dog and cat, right? So someone wants to know, so since you're at a teaching university, do you have 24/7 hours? And
Yeah.
and you do. Interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, our hospital obviously has a critical care and emergency or service, and so the hospital is open 24/7, and you don't even need to call the hospital. You just pack your bags with the animal and show up at like 2:30 in the morning. Somebody will be there. So, and this is where, again, it comes down to good communication, right? A lot of times we have these doctors, residents, and interns that man the floor at these hours, really well trained, and they're really good at stabilizing, the exotic animal, and sometimes they need help, and they obviously are in the front line, so they're going to be the direct communication. They're going to be with the owner in the room. They're going to try to get as much information as possible, right? Has this happened before? Is this like, describe what happened at home? So they're going to ask all these questions, and sometimes they feel good enough to start with an initial therapy, and then in the vast majority they still call in the backup. So, and the backup, the first line of defense from them is usually like our residents and our interns, so our house officers that go through that specialty program that I talked in the beginning to become board certified. And so they're obviously the next level of comfort. And so they say, no, you're doing really everything good. However, increase that dose or add that medication, or, increase the fluid. So they're going to potentially tweak it, fine tune it a little bit. But they could be a judge that says, no, that seems exactly right what you're doing. Here are all the details. And, in the morning at 8 o'clock, that case is going to be transferred to us. And then we do morning rounds, and then we talk about what happened, and then we're going to come up with a diagnostic plan, because that's usually not the task of the overnight emergency staff to potentially diagnose the problem. What really like, what is the thing? That usually takes a little bit, and like I said, a lot of times it's advanced tests, and they can't be run at 2:30, or a lot of times there is a significant limitation. So we do that the next day. And so, but yes, there is a 24/7 coverage from that point of view here.
And do you have students in there preparing for the boards, or like the vet students? Are they manning that as well?
Well, not at night usually. There's some, so they usually leave around 6 or something like that, 6, 7. So there could be overnight treatment crews or whatever, but then they're usually not asked to be during the day. So they sometimes have shifts, but for us, we just have them basically for 12 hours, let's say from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening, or 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening. And then you have specialized staff, nurses, interns, residents, and overnight. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Then they can go home and study for the rest of their stuff. Give them time to sleep.
That's right.
So going back to bees, question about the bees. Has your work with the bees revealed anything about colony collapse disorder, since that seems to be
that's a
concern,
that's a
right?
loaded question. Yeah, and so this is why, for the people who don't know out there, it's like it's a fancy word, colony collapse disorder, which basically just describes what's happening, and it's actually catastrophic. So I always compare it to a cow farmer. So basically, if the situation would be similar to a cow farm, every winter the farmer would literally lose 40% of the livestock, because he would come one morning into the barn and there would be another couple of dead cows lying there. And then, the next morning there would be another couple of dead cows lying there. So, and until spring, you lose 40% of your flock if it's birds, if it's chicken, if it's, or whatever it is. Consider any kind of agricultural livestock being lost at a rate of close to 50%. It's not sustainable. It's crazy. And so this is basically what's called colony collapse disorder. And whenever you hear a word like this, you know that nobody has an idea what's happening. Because if you know what would be the cause of this, the scientists would put a name on it. Like we talked about aspergillosis, right? The bird died of aspergillosis. So we know it's a fungal disease. It's aspergillus causing the disease. So we're not causing it like bird collapse syndrome. So just a fact, colony collapse disorder means that we're observing a huge collapse of our colonies, but we have literally no idea. So the consensus among most scientists is that it's probably a multifactorial issue. And usually we talk about the P's. So we talk about pesticide use. So the pesticides that are being sprayed out, they're becoming more and more, let's say, resistant in the environment. They're hanging out much longer. They don't get inactivated by sunlight, by rain, they used to be washed off after the rain, and the bees could visit that flower or that crop again, and it was all gone. Now they really cling to it. They hang around in the water. The bees need to drink water, so they're picking up from there. And obviously, as we all know, the pesticide use per acre is not going down in recent years, it's going up. So there is some bioaccumulation happening. Then we have pathogens, the other P, which is just like they're fighting parasites, they're fighting bacterial diseases, they're fighting parasites, pathogens. So like a lot of stuff also affects them. And then the other one is poor nutrition. So, we're going away from obviously wildflower meadows, and in the old days agriculture, maybe that farmer had a couple acres of corn, that other farmer had a couple of soybean fields, that farmer had a little bit of potato. They would all bloom and blossom at different times. Now, like, the bees can't even fly farther enough because they're just going to see corn, or just going to see soy, or they're just going to see almonds in California. So they're getting kind of like what I would refer to as the prison diet, right? So bread and water, just like this one thing over and over and over. And again, we know from ourselves, if we don't have a balanced diet, our immune system suffers too. So this is why I think you have kind of like that perfect storm where all those different multifactorial factors come together and really wreak havoc on the bees' immune system mainly, and then we lose them.
So that's you just don't. It's hard to grasp that. That's such a big concept of the foraging for bees. Like I don't think you always hear foraging for birds and stuff, but it's interesting. Hey, going back to that, so there's exotic vets. There's not an exotic. Are they just entomologists? Is it an exotic bug?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Absolutely, you're right. So the and we at the University of Georgia, and this is another reason why I really felt strongly that we should have like the honeybee program in the veterinary curriculum should be much stronger than nothing. So we need to have something, because we have one of the world-renowned honeybee institutes here. We have a honeybee institute coming out of the Department of Entomology that really, like, people fly from all over the world to get to be part of the master's program, of the master beekeeper program that the University of Georgia offers, which is a very daunting program to become a master beekeeper. And so I talked to the head of the Honeybee Institute and said, listen, and he was really amazing. He really understood the problem immediately, and he said, yeah, absolutely, veterinarians should play a role. They have to play a role, and I think it could be a win-win situation. So I work very, very closely with the Honeybee Institute at the University of Georgia together, and it's very already very fruitful, and yeah, I think there's going to be some really cool news coming out of the university pretty soon.
Maybe we could have a revisit that in another webinar coming up
Yeah.
about the bees.
If people want to hear about it,
yeah, it's important. So I have to announce our winner for today. They have our giveaway that's going out to Leslie Frank. That's the foraging kit and then another product of your bird's choice. So that makes you and your bird's weekend. And this is a sneak peek next weekend. Next Friday, we're on with Lisa Bono for the Gray Way webinar on food is fun. And then we're doing our 100th episode the Friday after that with Dr. Stephanie Lamb, and she's going to be broadcasting live from Costa Rica. So that's going to be exciting. Some good things to look forward to. And once again, Dr. Mayer, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us a little sneak peek of what you do in your day and day out to further the health and wealth of our birds. So thank you.
Wow. I can't believe the hour is already up. I could go on forever. So wow, that was fun.
Thank you. I hope we'll see you back soon, sooner than a year from now, because I think we had you last year in October. So we'll make it a little more sooner than that, hopefully. So
sure.
All right, everyone. On that note, have a great weekend. Until next time, everyone stay healthy and stay safe. Bye.
Ciao.